Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. APEC, Globalization and Civil Rights. By APEC, of course, is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation that will be held, the conference will be held in November in Honolulu, hence the urgency for us talking about that. With us to help us have a discussion about APEC and what it means in terms of globalization and civil rights, we have Carolyn Hadfield from Revolution Books and Professor Manfred Steger from Political Science at University of Hawai'i, Mānoa, and Kit Grant from the ACLU of Hawaii chapter. I should say also that I am from the ACLU, just for disclosure, on the board of the ACLU Hawaii. So what I would like to do first is to ask Carolyn and then Manfred and then Kit about why are you interested in discussing APEC and what it means to you before we go into more detail about things.
One, I was involved with the Asian Development Bank protests when it came here, and at that time we projected that there would be more international meetings and that there was a kind of a plan or a hope to establish Hawaii as a diplomatic hub of the Pacific region, just as it's a military hub. And so when this was announced, I was immediately alarmed because, like the Asian Development Bank, APEC, I think, is a tool of the imperialist countries that pries open the oppressed countries and takes their resources, their labor, and is very destructive to the environment, promoting corporations. So, you know, that's everything that I don't like. And I just think that there's a very important thing to start thinking about the world and to stop thinking only like Americans.
Yeah, later on I'll press you on some of the things that you have asserted. Manfred?
Well, I'm interested because I've been teaching about globalization and neoliberalism, what goes by the name of neoliberalism, which is a whole economic theory, which I'm sure we'll be talking about quite a bit tonight, for over a decade. And certainly APEC is one of the major economic forums that is actively disseminating certain kinds of ideas and certain kinds of visions that a lot of people believe in because they're being more or less bombarded with those messages on a daily basis. And therefore, I think it's very important for us to talk about APEC in a balanced way that on one hand, I think should show what APEC says they are and give that a fair hearing, but also allow some critical perspectives to be brought forward too. But I'm sure we'll be doing that later on.
And I know you have written a number of books, and I just have here a couple of them very brief ones, like Globalization, a very short introduction. So I have this one here, and also another one on neoliberalism, a very short introduction also, by Manfred Steger and Ravi K. Roy, this neoliberalism. So could you say a little bit about those things before we go?
Those two books basically are just very short introductions, as the title says. And what they do is they should introduce people who have maybe very little background knowledge about things like globalization or neoliberalism to some of the basic ideas, practices, policies, in a way that, again, allows a full spectrum of opinions to be represented. And yet, at the same time, I certainly was writing about these things from a critical perspective, as all academics tend to do. So that's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's pretty good, Kit?
Oh, thanks. Well, the ACLU, as you may or may not know out there in TV land, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that defends the Bill of Rights from government abuse. We actually don't have a position on globalization, but we do have a strong position on the First Amendment. And the First Amendment, of course, which guarantees your right to free speech, free assembly, And when events like APEC occur, similar to any controversial large event, Asian Development Bank, G8, political conventions come to mind when there are disputed topics. Sometimes the law enforcement response to peaceful, lawful protest can be really out of step with the tone sort of amps up, and then you find mass arrests. You have problems of that nature, and so the ACLU is very much interested in keeping our APEC arrest-free, if it's at all possible, in keeping it peaceful, making sure that people's voices get heard, first and foremost, that the Constitution is respected, but also that that people know their rights and can exercise them freely and know that line between civil disobedience and lawful protest.
Yeah, on that score, I was reading something a while back about Carlyle getting frustrated about that one of the main problems, or the most important problem that would be facing APEC would be the homeless. So I was like, whoa, taken aback by that. And he's also frustrated. I mean, now he's talking, we're talking about someone in law enforcement, because he was like before the city prosecutor, right? And he was frustrated that the laws that exist, don't allow him to deal with the homeless the way he wants to. Right. So could you say a bit more about that, or about things similar to that?
Well, first of all, I'll preface everything I'm saying tonight by the fact that I'm not an attorney. I'm actually an anthropologist by training, but so I can't really give legal advice or anything. But I do want to, as much as possible, like share the experiences of our affiliate. If they can help, and the desire of government to sort of present a sanitized picture, put our best foot forward for APEC. Of course, the first thing you think about is possibly like sweeping the homeless. Now, we've been working, our legal department has been working with law enforcement locally for over a year to let them know, that's not constitutional, it's not allowed by the law. As much as you would like to do something like that, it's not permissible, and we will take action if they do try to do something like that. But on the other hand, it's like, it doesn't stop the wishes of the government. Certainly their job would be a lot easier if these laws that protect people who don't wish to take medication or don't wish to be at home were not there. Mm-hmm. But they are there, and we will uphold them. Yeah.
Now, of course, Peter Carlyle is the mayor, as everyone knows. And it's interesting that he's not only frustrated by the laws, but I mean, this is something that what he would like to do would be unconstitutional. So he has problems with the U.S. Constitution, it seems to me, from what he said.
Right, and yet at this point, all of the law enforcement sources we've spoken to say that they are not going to do that, and at this point we will take them at their word, but we are ready to act if necessary. I know also that our mayor has, kind of been upping the rhetoric around the issue of the homeless, and maybe not necessarily tying it into APEC, but just recently in the media he was comparing our homeless families to worse than rats. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think that's like a helpful analogy, and really it does polarize the community. And he needs to remember that everybody gets a vote.
Yeah,
whether they have a home or not.
From an official who's supposed to be like. He studied law, what I mean? So,
I mean, he's entitled to his opinion, but his opinion bears a lot more weight.
Yeah. He's entitled to his opinion, but if he's wrong, people are entitled to criticize him and to show how racist he is, to talk about people as rats and so on, not only condescending, but I mean, this is, below the belt and beyond the pale, and that is very disgusting. This is my opinion, and I'm entitled to it, based on the facts that we are talking about. Okay, so Manfred, you have discussed globalization and talked about the theory and the background for that globalization in terms of theory, and you call that globalism. So could you tell us something about relationship between globalism and globalization, and then where would, in your estimation, this fit in terms of what APEC does or doesn't do?
Well, I think if we think of globalization as processes that have something to do with the expansion and the intensification of connections and relations across world time and world space, right? Then in a way, what we're talking about very often is economics, political processes, but also cultural processes, things like music and food and other types of films and so on. But globalization is not just about these things in the world out there that we can measure, that we can take pictures of, that we can discuss in an empirical way, so to speak. But globalization is also happening in our heads. In other words, this material process in the world out there about globalization is very often driven by ideas of where globalization should be going. And that's what I call globalism, because in many ways, those are ideologies. And by ideologies, I just mean shared visions or shared values and ideas that certain people in society have, and they believe that those are true, obviously, and they follow those ideas and try to put them into action. So there's a real connection between globalization, the process, and globalization, what I call globalism, the political ideas and the visions that people have. And I think the dominant of those visions with regard to globalization is what I call market globalism. And what I mean by market globalism is that these are ideas that basically see these connections in the world, these intensifying, accelerating connections, in terms of a market. In other words, ideas that would promote the integration of the world, the connection of the world, in terms of what? In terms of market principles. And not just basic market principles, but very often free market principles, which really means that it's not just that the market is necessary, but that pretty much all human interactions should occur along the lines of free market principles, which means that in many ways, any type of regulation or any type of interaction that is not based on market principles or money or commodities or exchange is something that is not necessarily part of that market vision. So I think that APEC, to a large extent, believes in and disseminates these ideas of market globalism. And I want to be very clear about that most people who are connected to APEC probably, are people who are, ethical to some extent, and, they have families, and they are normal people like you and me, and they believe in those ideas. And they think that those ideas, if they are being put into practice, will do a whole, range of things that they consider to be good things.
Yeah.
So they have this market vision, and they disseminate this market vision, and they think it leads to economic prosperity, and they hope that all boats are being lifted, and inequality is going to, decrease. And that's basically what they're saying. And I think that that vision is being contested by another version of globalism that I call justice globalism. Those are people who do not believe that free, unfettered markets necessarily are going to bring about all those good things that market globalists are talking about. So we have these two major visions that in a way are clashing with each other, as we've seen more than 10 years ago on the streets of Seattle, and continue to clash. And they were clashing here when the ADB came to town. And I think that in many ways, ordinary people have to make up their mind which ideas and values to believe in. And that's why I think it's important to talk about the APEC in terms of these ideologies, in terms of these ideas, and really critically look at some of those ideas and see whether they really hold up.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the thing. Just one comment before I go to you, Carolyn, which is it's interesting that a number of those countries that are in APEC they are not democratic countries. So it is an interesting thing, like, they believe in free markets, but they don't believe in freedom in their own particular
Well,
country.
I think they would probably respond by saying that even though they're not fully democratic, once they align themselves or associate themselves with free market regimes or a free market forum like APEC, ultimately democracy will follow. That's one of their, what I call, ideological claims.
Right.
And what we've seen in many cases, that's not the case.
Well, I mean, Egypt would be an example of that, because there was Mubarak who, and Sadat before him, who opened up to the West and started privatizing and so on, and going to the free market route. And the gap between rich and poor in Egypt went haywire. So you have like 40% of the population under the poverty line, according to the United Nations definition of what poverty is, etc. And there was an uprising.
That's right. And I think the same thing can be said for Vietnam, for example.
Absolutely,
which was
yes.
one of the last countries to join APEC back in 1998.
Right.
And Vietnam, as we all know, is, nominally communist, whatever that means, but certainly an authoritarian regime that does not allow the kinds of values that Kid, for example, was just talking about in terms of freedom of expression and freedom of assembly and so on and so forth. So there are certainly authoritarian regimes that are connected to APEC. No question about it.
Philippines is another example with sham
Singapore.
democracy, Singapore, and a lot of stuff. But you asserted certain things. But the way I would like to broach that with you, in connection with what Manfred has talked about, globalism, globalization, and that is the question of, well, we mentioned like the countries that are in APEC, and actually they don't talk about them as countries. They talk about them economies. So why is that?
The economies question, as I understood it, was in order to avoid the Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, which one. So they're just calling them economies, but actually it's 21 countries.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to know too, because we always think of APEC as only Asian, but that countries like Mexico, Canada, Chile, Peru are all part of APEC too. So it's the whole perimeter of the Pacific. It isn't only the countries that we generally think of as APEC countries,
and even
I guess.
Papua New Guinea, PNG. Is,
but none of the other Pacific islands are nations.
Right.
I mean, you have to have a
That's right.
certain economic strength and be willing to comply with certain things to be in it. And also that it was started by the U.S. I mean, this was started by the U.S. in '89.
But via Australia, actually.
Yeah, via Australia. Yeah.
Via Australia.
Via Australia and U.S. and
this is a critical
important.
point. So it's interesting that this kind of connection is happening.
But
so,
I think one of the things people really should do is go to the APEC site. That's just apec.com, because they are very blatant. They talk about free trade. They say right in their first thing, our mission is to improve the business relations. They don't talk about people in their beginning mission statements.
Reduce the costs of trade.
And they talk about free trade. And very quickly, they talk about wanting to establish a NAFTA-type structure for the Pacific countries. So, I mean, they're real blatant about having their principal objective be market and business and trade and deregulation. So it's not, I mean, I do think people have to make a decision over which side they're going to be on that, whether it's the market and that ideology is first, or whether it's justice and people's lives, culture, the ability to be sovereign and separate.
Yeah, and then the other thing, it's what's interesting to me, not only in terms of APEC, but in terms of all these free trade agreements and these organizations that promote neoliberal ideas for the benefit of humanity, presumably, although, like as you said, on their sites, they don't deal with that. They are blatant about, it's like for business, basically. Is that On the one hand, they promote free trade, and freedom of movement of
Free to take.
monies, funds, etc., investment funds, etc.
Yeah.
But economics tells us the three main factors of production are land, labor, and capital. Land you cannot move; it's a mass that is there. But then these neoliberal ideas deal with free markets. Only for trade and then movement of investment, so that's capital, but they don't talk about freedom of movement of labor, or labor power, So I see this as a major hole in the logic of just like productivity and production, in terms of the capitalist system. How can you move one factor of production, but you restrict the other one? It seems to me there is a problem right there, because why not move all of these things, in a free way? But why do you think they don't do that?
Well, I think there are certain countries that control APEC more than other countries, and their particular interests are, to get cheaper labor in those countries, to be able to get the resources out of those countries with as few restrictions as possible, to be able to get the resources and deregulate a lot of the environmental issues. I know that Peru, it has meant the deregulation of like oil and a lot of their environmental protections. So I don't know, your particular question of these divisions,
Yeah.
I don't know. Manfred may be more
Manfred, would you care to comment
speak
on that?
on that difference between labor and...
Yeah, I think that it's very interesting, coming back to what you said in terms of the connection between Australia and the United States. Australia was really, back in 1989, when APEC was put together as a forum, was really the driving force, of course, in connection with the United States. And I think it's important to remember that it was a pretty left Labour government under Bob Hawke, the Prime Minister of Australia, who was pushing for that. So in many ways, it was within Labour where some of those neoliberal ideas were being embraced in that part of the world. New Zealand already had by that time, undergone a transformation, also under Labour governments, to embrace these neoliberal principles. So I think that it's much bigger than just one particular party or one particular spectrum. I think it's both major parties or major sides of the spectrum, if you wish. Labor or liberal or social democratic and conservative, that all agree in principle on these so-called neoliberal principles, that even this term Washington consensus that was came about in the 1980s is kind of all-encompassing. So yes, absolutely powerful countries are exerting the pressure to get kind of low-cost production going in these countries that are called developing countries. But it's also developing countries who want to attract that kind of capital because their leaders, very often educated in the United States, in Europe, in those countries, do believe in the principles of market globalism. So it's a very interesting kind of phenomenon where elites agree and ordinary people very often are bombarded by messages which seem to be saying that what these elites are saying is right. So they kind of tend to agree. If you look at opinion polls, 57% of people generally think that market globalization is a good thing. And yet, once they're being confronted, I think, with more kind of critical material, then they very often see that these elite visions are not necessarily coinciding with what's going on the ground. That doesn't really jive with their own lives. So I think it's very important to get across this notion that I think there's an overall consensus among the elites, and people are not necessarily always on the side of those elites. And I think that's where some of the resistance comes in.
Yeah, you
I
mentioned
also
something
think it's
about
very
that,
different for different countries. Like when you go to the Philippines, and I've been in large demonstrations in the Philippines, You know, people understand that neoliberalism is a bad thing if they're poor. There's a broader understanding, where in this country, I don't think there's much understanding at all, partly because the U.S. reaps a lot of benefits. But, you know, there's a reason why in Korea, say, they had 20, 25, 30,000 people on the streets every day of the meeting in resistance. There was a broader understanding, especially from the agricultural community, of what that meant in their everyday lives. And so it's very uneven as far as countries, you know, and their understanding of neoliberal policies. If you say neoliberalism in the U.S., frankly, mostly people's eyes glaze over.
Yeah.
That it doesn't mean something concrete to them.
Right. Yeah. I'm thinking, as you're talking about the Philippines, I mean, the development strategy for the Philippines, I mean, it is, in a sense, neoliberal and free, quote-unquote, free trade, etc. At the same time, the gap between rich and poor has increased. I mean, I was in the Philippines a long time ago, and I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, that I go visit picket lines, you know, workers striking, picket lines, and then this guy who's a worker, you think like, you know, he doesn't know anything about anything, but he talks about the World Bank, about the IMF, and he knows a lot about it, and what's the relationship between that and why he's striking now, and you know, the government and the state machinery and all of that. It was wonderful experience for me to see.
For me too.
Yeah, to see those things. Yeah. So I mean, here we have, you know, in Hawaii, for instance. APEC is coming to town, right? And that's why, you know, I asked Kit about, you know, the things that the ACLU is preparing for and so on. Could you tell us more before we go into the Hawaii section of the show and talking about APEC and so on? Because they have like a whole website for Hawaii, you know, and more than one. But I mean, before we go to that, could you tell us some of the preparations that ACLU is doing, you know, beyond what you said in general?
Yeah, and you know, from my earlier comments, I would not want people to think that we're only working with law enforcement. Outreach to law enforcement has been part of what we're doing. We've also been reaching out to anyone who might be protesting, and of course, any inquiry into our organization is confidential. We are not a government organization. We are not associated with law enforcement. We sue the government more than anybody else does. So we are not a government advocate. We are a government watchdog, and so I do encourage people to, if you're considering a protest, to contact our office, and we would be happy to you know, to give folks some general guidelines about what their rights are. We're developing a toolkit for protesters at APEC and demonstrators, and also we have been assembling volunteers who would like to be what's called a protest monitor, where basically you are content neutral, just like the ACLU. So you don't take a position on the event. You're not on the side of law enforcement. You're not on the side of the protesters, but you are there to observe, to document interactions between the two groups in order to make sure that people's rights are being respected. So we definitely, you know, in the hopes that we can have a citizenry like, you know, you said your experience in the Philippines, you know, that is aware of the issues that they care about because they can discuss them freely, knows their rights and how to demonstrate and protest lawfully, that we can avoid any, you know, horrible incidents at APEC. And so we have been putting a lot of effort into reaching out to young folks, as well as our, you know, our wonderful community here of, you know, people who critique the government, and to make sure that everyone knows that, you know, we're here, we're on the job, and if anything does happen at APEC, we will be ready to respond.
Yeah. On that, like, I'm just reflecting on the Asia Development Bank. There were police were more. There were more than demonstrators. There were police more than demonstrators, a lot of them with their bicycles and stuff, and helicopters.
That was before 9/11.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the helicopters and all that. Do you have like some memory of some of the things?
Oh,
that,
yes.
And I'm sure Carolyn has
Yeah. No, I'm gonna go to, but in terms of
yeah.
ACLU.
Big
Yes.
learning
Yeah.
experience for affiliates like ours. We're a small office.
Right.
You know, we have a staff of 6, and at that time, I think we had a staff of maybe 3 or 4. But we had a very scrappy and determined legal director who, at that time, really our approach was more reactive than proactive. You know, this time around, we're really trying to be proactive, taking a year out to communicate as much as possible, get the message out. But with the Asian Development Bank, what we saw was relatively small group of peaceful protesters and a law enforcement response down the line that was disproportionate. From the attempting to set perimeters that were unconstitutionally large. And the Constitution says that the government can regulate to a certain degree the time, place, and manner of protest, but if it becomes such that the person's voice would not be heard, for instance, if you have to be 2 miles away and 3 hours after the event, then that's unconstitutional, and that's where groups like the ACLU will step in, because if you allow those things to stand, and the one I'm thinking of, which is the 2 miles away and 2 hours afterwards, that actually had to do with that Fred Phelps case where they were protesting military funerals, and they had this horrendous message that I doubt anyone in the universe would stand up for.
Yeah.
But the ACLU did offer to go amicus on that, because once you let the government set that type of parameter based on speech that everybody hates, that's when suddenly you have a law that no one can live with.
Yeah.
And so we have really tried to reach out to the protesters, develop some proactive protest monitor approaches, and also to work with law enforcement and to get them on the record in the media saying that they are not going to sweep the homeless, they are not going to do mass arrests, they're not going to this and that.
Yeah, just a bit of follow-up. I know that some attorneys, one of them called me and said, have you heard anything about APEC? How can I help, So I said, well, why don't you contact the ACLU
Absolutely.
and see how you can help. I mean, that's like pro bono thing. So that leads me to the question, is the ACLU being proactive in terms of contacting other attorneys, whether here or elsewhere, because we could get like support from attorneys on the continental U.S. maybe, even to come here and do pro bono stuff, etc. So I don't know if you have more information on that.
Well, when I say our office is small, the reason that we can actually get a lot of important work done in Hawaii is because we have a massive support from our local community in terms of volunteers. These volunteers can be anyone from people who help stuff envelopes to people who help table events, but they can be some of the most potent defense attorneys in the state as well. So we've been reaching out to the local bar. We've been also communicating with the national ACLU, which is sort of a grass tops network of other major defense attorneys. But of course, you have to be licensed to practice in the state that you're going to be working in, and etc. But I know that we're taking advice from anybody that we can get it from in terms of how to approach any cases that may come out of it, and also definitely working with our local defense bar, especially, just to assess people's interest and availability and that sort of thing. So any attorneys who might be interested in that aspect of APEC definitely should also contact our office.
Yeah. There's also the National Lawyers Guild. There's a chapter here
Actually, I should mention a shout out to the National Lawyers Guild as well, because they actually developed the curriculum for protest monitors, and they've been very, very helpful. And in fact, I believe they're sending somebody out to Hawaii for this. who will help us with that model. And we do have NLG presence here in Hawaii, and they've been super helpful as well.
National Lawyers
Yeah.
Guild, NLG.
Great people.
Okay, yeah. Could you say something about the ADB and your experience and what you might...
Oh, boy. Did we ever work with ACLU? That was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It was 2001. One thing is that there were a lot of people who wanted to protest. I think the message that came out, that there was a lot of education that went in before the Asian Development Bank, and people began to understand the effect of dams in these various countries and things like that, and they were wanting to act. And I think when it looked like there might be some people on the street, I mean, it's going to be limited in Hawaii because we're an island and we have a relatively small population. But when it looked like there was going to be quite a bit on the street, they started a real fear campaign, I think. You know, that's when you saw the military practicing with the police, and they had those simulated attacks on demonstrators that they showed on the evening news. And I know that a lot of people just felt they could no longer bring their family to the march, which was, you know, from the beginning was a call for everyone to come out. But people felt very fearful and that there was a lot of intimidation. And that was before 9/11. You know, it was like 3 months before. But, you know, there was a lot of fear in the air. And that brought the number of people who actually came out to protest way down. And even to be able to protest in the street, we had to have a lawsuit. We had to sue for a space to be able to stand with signs. It was a long process, which hasn't, I don't think, happened in the same way prior to this one. Yeah. Now, there are people gearing up now for protest and for a lot of educational campaigns. I'm speaking here on behalf of Revolution Books tonight. And we have a series of 5 forums at the store. We've enlarged our books on globalization so that people can find out about it. I'm also a member of World Can't Wait, and that's put out this little leaflet called APEC Sucks, which is, you know, the labor of the people and the resources of the land. And that gives some basic facts, and we've already gotten out 3,000 of those, and we're getting out a lot more. This last week at First Friday, we went to First Friday, and there were just a few of us to leaflet this. And there were more police waiting for us than we were. And I think that's a very intimidating presence, and one that's meant for intimidation.
Yeah. Before we go to the Hawaii part, I'd like to ask Manfred.
Yes.
I mean, there is APEC, of course. I mean, we've been talking about it, but they want to expand. You know, like there is this thing called, it's not yet there, but considering the prospects for a free trade area of the Asia Pacific. Right. You know, I'm just reading it. And why do you think, you know, they trying to do that?
I think because in many ways, APEC has always made very, very clear that although they are a regional organization and would like to have a regional network of, you know, extreme free market, trade liberalization, investment liberalization zone, they are always tied in, and they made it very clear, to the idea that the whole world should be operating on those principles. And as Carolyn said before, we have other areas like that. You know, we know about NAFTA, we know about the free trade area of the Americas, we know about the European Union. And, you know, there are, in other words, regional attempts underway to carve out, so to speak, these spaces where free market principles pretty much can operate with, and this is just my view, without sufficient democratic control and regulation. Now, I certainly am not against markets. I think that markets are necessary and markets do a lot of good. However, I think there is something really very problematic about unregulated markets and free markets. And I think it's very, very important that the electoral system, which is supposedly democratic and based upon the power of the people, has the right to intervene and regulate markets in such a way that markets actually work for all people. So this principle of equality, a principle of distributive justice, is what is very important to me. And these free trade areas are, in a way, zones where that kind of democratic control, that distributive justice, can't really work to the extent that it should. As a matter of fact, those are areas where free market processes driven by business interest, driven by profit principles, establish themselves as the dominant forces, and certainly they work for some people, but I would argue they do not work for all people. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of the people typically are the ones that don't benefit at as much, or sometimes not at all, or sometimes even are disadvantaged by those areas. So I think it's really, really important to see here, again, a link between ideas and values and ideologies, if you wish, and space. In other words, those ideas translate not just into political principles or not just into some sort of abstract rules. If you read about APEC and you go through the website, it's sometimes very abstract and cumbersome, and it's not a good read, let's put it this way. It's very hard to make your way through it.
You would sleep while you're reading.
Yes, but I think once it's translated into space, and this is what Kit was talking about as well when she was talking about protest zones. I mean, these are spaces. So there's a struggle for how we use space, what can be done in certain kinds of spaces, and what spaces are being created.
Right.
Yeah. And I think this is where, once again, ideas then become very, very concrete and principles become very concrete. And in a way, we're all talking about the fact that I think we're all in favor of democratic spaces.
Yeah.
And certainly APEC probably would agree with us.
Yeah.
And that's why you need, I think, a really open, discussion in terms of what exactly do you mean by that. And that's where the differences come in.
Well, let me comment a little bit and then see what you think. And also, everyone here. Well, someone would say that free markets promote freedom and democracy, but here Kit is talking about, no, I mean, those spaces are not democratic, are not free, etc. But the entire notion of free market, I mean, if you're saying you're opposing free markets and you want markets, you are for markets but not free markets unregulated, then somebody would say, well, are you against free markets? So let me ask you point blank, are there free markets?
I think that there are attempts to establish free markets, but, from my point of view, those attempts to establish free markets simply are attempts to create spaces where certain privileged interests have free reign. And what usually happens when those attempts are being made is that ordinary people, sooner or later, have to defend themselves against those types of forces. And that's where you see movements then against those free markets, and that's when markets become controlled. A very good example for that would be, in our own history, the 1930s and FDR and the New Deal, which was basically coming out of the 1920s in a period where free markets were being pushed, and free markets and unregulated markets and stock markets not being regulated, which sounds a lot like our time, were given free reign. Yeah. And ultimately, as we all know, it led to what was called then the Great Depression. And people organized, and what they did is they tried to not do away with markets, but again, control markets. And I think FDR's, New Deal was one of those attempts. So I think we need a New Deal. Yeah. We don't have to abolish markets, but I think we need a New Deal where we create organizations, institutions that are truly global, but they control those global markets. They control those free trade areas in a way that perhaps APEC doesn't really want to.
So like those free markets are, to develop that further, free for whom? I mean,
they're free for the people who control them.
Yeah.
It's
right?
free to the largest countries, the biggest businesses, your Walmarts, your you know,
Just
the
like
huge
yeah,
business
just like having
and the government, the
Right,
larger
right,
governments. I think this APEC is going to see a lot of contention because you have the China-U.S. Competition and sort of parameters. I think will be set for the way they can deal with each other, or they'll try to at this APEC.
Yeah.
It reflects the businesses and the competition and trying to set guidelines for those among the rulers and among the rich. I think you can look at what's happening in Honolulu and help understand actually APEC. Here we're in the middle of rolling out the red carpet in Honolulu for a bunch of leaders of companies and countries. You know, we've hauled in 210 palm trees from the outer island at a couple million, you know, to plunk down on Nimitz Highway to welcome them. We're clearing out the homeless. They say they're not, but the homeless sure know they are. You know, they've been talking to us and saying, no, you know, they know APEC is sort of after them and trying to clean them out.
Yeah.
That the people who are benefiting from this are people who are trying to promote rich tourism, the larger country. And the poor people in Honolulu are having their resources taken away from them. You know, we had the headline in the paper today or something was $6 million lost in the homeless funds. Yeah. But there's $47 million being spent on security for APEC. I mean, what's wrong with that picture, you know? 150 million being put into Waikiki, but the schools are in shambles. What's wrong with that picture? And I think that can help you understand what APEC is relative to larger country, larger, you know, richer interests, and then what actually happens to the people of those countries. But there's a mirror reflection there.
Yeah. In terms of Hawaii, we have the University of Hawaii going gung-ho for APEC. And I mean, I don't see any problem promoting APEC if you want to express your view about APEC, etc. But as I was telling students, that if you really want to be educated about APEC, you got to listen and learn about all these points of view and those perspectives, not only one perspective. APEC is good. Like at one meeting, faculty meeting for the college, I said, well, not all is hunky-dory about APEC. There are people and there are things about APEC that are not necessarily good, and people, not everybody thinks that they are. And therefore, we should inform our students and our public about those kinds of ideas as well. I mean, that's like, if you're not learning as a student, you know, all points of view or a lot of points of view about it, then you're being shortchanged. I mean, in terms of academics and scholarly you know, knowledge and so forth. So the thing is then to allow, I mean, if APEC promotes democracy and freedom, allow those kinds of multiplicity of voices to be heard so you can have a better citizenry and better educated students about APEC, etc., and not just go gun-ho for one thing and not deal with the other stuff.
But I think a climate has been created already at the university that basically says, you are with us or against us, by having that big sign, we welcome APEC, without an input from the faculty, the students, as to whether everyone really does welcome APEC.
Yeah.
Those signs are all over, and so I think people are really going to have to fight for that space.
Can I just say something? I think I agree. I don't know where the sign came from and who was consulted, but if that's the case, I absolutely agree with Carolyn.
There are many signs.
That there should be, yeah. But on the other hand, I think one should also be fair and say that the point person from the university who was appointed by the president to prepare and make connections, Denise Conan from the economics department, who's the incoming Dean of Social Sciences, has been very open in her call to for faculty and students to submit ideas in what way the university can be connected to APEC, and has been very open in terms of looking at a variety of ways. Now, what this ultimately the process is going to be and exactly what will happen, I'm very eager to see. But I do want to say that I think that in many ways, there also have been attempts made by the university to kind of broaden this out, and certainly, to some extent at least, welcome critical voices.
Yeah, on that, I mean, I talked with Denise Conan on that, and I told her, I want to connect with her and so on. She said, yeah, I mean, that's fine. But the thing is that the university itself should also, from the top, promote other voices, not like leave it to like me and you and, us guys, we the people, to do that, So say, let's, for the sake of good quality liberal education, let's do any opposition to that. Let's have a forum that has people from both sides. Everybody says, well, what about the other side? Well, show me the other side. Have you seen the other side? Have you been to the other side? Do you know what the other side says? That is good education, it seems to me. So yes, we will push, and that's why, I mean, as you say, and that's why I talked with Denise, and she gonna, I'm gonna talk with her again sometime next week and see what might happen. But at the same time, the university administration should be doing that proactively as well.
Actually, I think that's a fantastic idea, Ibrahim. The idea of having a real, high-profile, very visible type of forum that would also connect to various community groups and outreach within the city and the state, and really have a good debate with both sides being represented fairly. And really talk about, the arguments and whether or not they have merit, and really allow the university to play that kind of critical role, as you say, that the university should be playing. So absolutely. I think that would be a great idea.
Well, I'm glad that, she said to you that she wanted that, because that was not reflected in the article. And of course, Kaleo is hardly to be totally quoted, but that was not what was reflected in the article. She was very uncritical of APEC and just presented as an overwhelmingly good thing, I thought. And, I'm happy to see some response now in Kaleo to it. And hopefully there will be a lot more debate about it.
Like, you want to say something?
Yeah, Nandita Sharma from Sociology has a letter to the editor, APEC equals greed, not need. And I also want to refer people, since that slogan is up there, if you want to say it, to a website, nomula.com, which actually has a lot of information too. That's www.nomula.com, which has different ways people might protest. There's a big brochure up on that site as well. That there really does have to be a lot more discussion of this, because to me, students are still glazing over at the even word globalization, and it's not a part of the dialogue.
Manfred, you were saying to me a few days back that there are people who are interested in this, and they're going to put on some kind of forum?
Yes, as far as I know, I've been contacted already by a number of groups that I think are trying to put together if you can say, an alternative forum to APEC, which will take place either just before or after.
It's taking place
yes, please.
Moana Nui.
Moana Nui, that's right.
Okay, Moana Nui takes place at the very same time as the APEC summit meeting, from
11th.
From Thursday, Friday will be the public days, and their website is moananui2011.org.
I think it'd be wonderful for people to visit that website and get together, because I think there are a number of groups that I think would be really good to get to know.
Moana Nui,
one word, 2011.org.
Okay, that's a good one.
And then World Can't Wait is having a festival of resistance on September 23rd and inviting organizations to come and table at the university and to talk about how it may affect their organization, and to, create a certain kind of atmosphere of resistance on campus. So hopefully people will see more of a two-sided debate going on
well,
campus.
that's good. I mean, that's real understanding the issues and listening to all points of view, or as many points of view as possible. That's what a good education is. We have like still a few minutes, 4 minutes, I think. The question of APEC in terms of Hawaii, I mean, you look at the list of people on the committee, I mean, fascinating. There is even like talking about Labour and Bob Hawke in Australia. Well, there are a couple of Labour leaders on that, I think it's HGEA or, I think one of those organizations is there. Members of the committee. There are people from OHA also, and of course the big banks and all of that, the big hotels, etc.
It's big business.
Yeah,
it brings a lot of money to the state. So that's what really is, to some extent, at stake. And in a time of high unemployment, those types of things are welcome by the business community, and certainly they will try to make a very strong argument why this benefits the state. And those are the arguments that I think should be voiced and should be contested openly.
Right. In fact, when was it? A couple of days ago, I was talking to an economist who said that, he's not too gung-ho on APEC because he said that, yes, initially there'll be like a lot of money spent, etc., but doesn't know exactly, or doesn't believe that there are going to be like spillovers for Hawaii from it, even for the business, as much as people might think. Because he said that the people who coming there from all kinds of places like Philippines, wherever, trying to see what the United States can do for them, not what they can do to the United States, to paraphrase Kennedy, right? So it is an interesting thing because they want to, okay, well, what can you give us, rather than, and probably the U.S. would be promoting this, because what they want to do is like to control more of the global economy and have a lot of more grasp on it. Then I got to promise you something so I can have control over you, in a sense, So it seems to me that is very interesting in terms of, is there going to be a spillover in the long term, and all these Hawaii businesses going to like become global all of a sudden, if they are not yet. So that's...
I mean, it seems like we're getting very locked into one sort of vision of the world that isn't based on justice and isn't based, it's more based on market and things, and we enter into that without looking and trying to find another vision of what the world could be, whether it could really be a world that's good for all of the people, whether or not we can get to a place. And I think that has to be part of the conversation too. Because, it's like people say, are you against globalization? Well, you can't against globalization.
How can
I mean, we are where we're at.
What kind of globalization? Globalization for whom?
What kind and for whom, and how is it going to work? And how, and that's, I encourage people to come to Revolution Books and see what we have to say too.
So we have like less than a minute. Kit, would you want to leave us with some pointers and things that...
Sure. Well, the Constitution was written in order to protect your right to have these dialogues that you folks are talking about. And I think, we always believe that the solution for speech you don't like is more speech. So if you're planning to protest at APEC, you can contact our office at office@acluhawaii.org. We'd be happy to hear from you and to give you some tips.
Yeah. Manfred, quick...
Very quick, I would encourage viewers to log on, check out APEC, and check out, as you said, the other side, and really look at both arguments and critically try to come to your own conclusions. I think that's what the best of education is all about.
Thank you. We are flat out of time. Thank you for our viewers for watching. See you next month, and thank you folks for coming over and sharing some of your views. We have a lot more to discuss on that, perhaps another program on APEC post the 2011 conference over here. Okay, aloha, mahalo nui.
Aloha.